Imagine moving into your first college apartment. You're young, excited, and ready to chase your dreams. But what if, just beyond your front door, someone is watching you? Someone who doesn't see you as a person, but as prey. Someone waiting for the perfect moment to strike. In Gainesville, Florida, in fall of 1990, that nightmare became reality. And for 5 innocent students, it will be the last days of their lives. This is a chilling story of Danny Rowland, the man who came to be known as the Gainesville Ripper, a killer who turned a vibrant college town into a hunting ground and proved that sometimes the greatest danger lives right next door. Gainesville, Florida, home to the University of Florida, one of the nation's largest campuses. In the late summer of 1990, it was alive with returning students, young men, and women moving into apartments, reconnecting with friends, and preparing for classes. The air was filled with energy and possibility, but that energy was about to be replaced by fear, because lurking in the shadows was a man who had been shaped by violence from the moment he was born, a man who carried rage like a weapon, and who would soon unleash it on a town unprepared for the horror that awaited. The first victims. On August 24th, 17-year-old Christina Powell and her 18-year-old roommate, Sonia Larson, settled into their new apartment for the semester. Both were bright, full of promise, and ready to take on the world. But by morning, neither would be alive. Police discovered their bodies after friends grew concerned. The scene was brutal, both women stabbed multiple times. The apartment showed signs of forced entry. But what stood out most to investigators was not just the violence, but the staging. The killer had deliberately positioned their bodies as though he wanted to leave behind a message. For Gainesville, it was the start of a nightmare. The very next day, August 25th, 18-year-old Krista Hoyt didn't show up for her midnight shift at the sheriff's office records apartment where she worked part-time. Officers who went to check on her found her apartment empty at first. But inside, they discovered something far worse. Krista had been murdered, and her body had been staged in a grotesque display. It wasn't enough for the killer to end her life. He wanted to shock, to terrify, to dominate even in death. By now, panic spread like wildfire across Gainesville. Students called home crying, afraid to leave their apartments. Hardware stores sold out of locks, chains, and baseball bats. Helicopters circled above at night, their spotlights cutting across darkened streets. The college town, once a place of dreams, felt like a war zone. And yet, the killer wasn't done. On August 27th, 2 more lives were taken. 23-year-old Tracy Poles and her roommate, Manuel Tabawada, were found brutally murdered in their apartment. For investigators, this was a turning point. Manuel, unlike the previous victims, was a strong young man, athletic, capable of fighting back. And yet, Evie couldn't stop the attacker. That fact told police something chilling. This wasn't a crime of opportunity. This was the work of someone experienced, someone who knew exactly what he was doing. Within 4 days, 5 innocent students were dead. Gainesville was paralyzed with fear. Police worked around the clock. The brutality of the murders, the staging of the bodies, the lack of witnesses, everything pointed to a predator who had slipped in and out of homes with terrifying ease. But who could be responsible? Early suspects came and went. One man was questioned, then cleared after DNA evidence excluded him. Investigators felt the pressure of the city on edge. Parents flooded Gainesville, pulling their children out of school. Nearly 700 students withdrew from the university that semester. The killer had not only taken lives, he had stolen the town's sense of safety. And as police scrambled for answers, the man behind it all was hiding in plain sight. Danny Harold Rowling was born in Shreveport, Louisiana in 1954. From the beginning, his life was marked by cruelty. His father, a police officer, was abusive both physically and emotionally. Danny grew up in a household where love was absent, replaced by violence and control. As a teenager, he turned to crime, unable to escape the cycle of abuse and anger that defined his early years. Burglaries, thefts, and eventually assaults became part of his life. He drifted from place to place, never finding stability, never outrunning the rage that had been planted in him since childhood. By the time he arrived in Gainesville in August of 1990, Danny Rowling was a drifter on the run. He had already killed before. Just weeks earlier, in Shreveport, Louisiana, Authorities would later link him to a triple homicide, the murders of Tom, Julie, and Sean Grissom, a family slaughtered in their own home. But Gainesville wouldn't know that until much later. For now, all they knew was that a predator was among them. Picture it. Students sleeping in groups, too afraid to be alone. Doors and windows sealed shut, blinds permanently drawn. Police sirens a constant soundtrack to the night. Gainesville wasn't living, it was surviving. And still, the question haunted every mind. Asterisk when we strike again? For the killer, the murders weren't just about ending lives. They were about control, dominance, and leaving behind terror as his legacy. The FBI began working closely with local law enforcement, building a profile of the murderer. They described him as a white male in his late 20s or early 30s, likely with a troubled past, someone who derived power from control and ritual. What they didn't know, at least not yet, was that their profile was dead on. Danny Rolling, the drifter living in a campsite outside of town, fit the description perfectly, but would take time, evidence, and one critical mistake for police to finally close in. As Gainesville trembled under the weight of fear, police doubled their patrols. Checkpoints were set up across the city, and tips flooded the hotline. Yet behind the chaos, the killer was living quietly, deep in the woods. Unbeknownst to investigators at the time, Danny Rolling had been camping in a wooded area near the University of Florida. There, hidden beneath the trees, he kept his weapons, tools, and stolen items from his victims. It was only after a series of burglaries in the area that police stumbled upon Rolling's campsite. Inside, they discovered something chilling. Audio recordings where Rolling sang and spoke about his inner demons, as well as tools and items linked to the Gainesville murders. But the most damning evidence would come later: DNA. Danny Rolling was eventually identified and arrested on unrelated charges in Ocala, Florida. He had robbed a supermarket and was being held in custody when investigators began piecing together the truth. DNA testing linked him directly to the Gainesville murders. Rolling's blood matched the biological evidence found at multiple crime scenes. For police, the case was no longer about if he was a killer. It was about proving just how many lives he had taken. And then, as investigators dug deeper, the horror grew. They tied Rolling to the Shreveport murders of the Grissom family. The brutal killings there mirrored the same staging and mutilation scene in Gainesville. Rolling wasn't just a killer. He was a serial killer, crossing state lines, leaving behind devastation wherever he went. In 1992, as the trial loomed, Rolling did something unexpected. Instead of forcing families to sit through years of testimony and evidence, he confessed. He admitted to the murders of Christina Powell, Sonia Larson, Krista Hoyt, Tracy Poles, and Manuel Tabawada in Gainesville. He admitted to the Grissom family murders in Shreveport, but his confessions weren't straightforward. They were almost theatrical. Rolling wrote songs, created disturbing drawings, and spoke of his dark side, an alter ego he called Gemini. He described being driven by an inner demon, one that demanded blood and control. For the families, the confessions brought answers, but no comfort. In April 1994, Danny Rolling was sentenced to death. Courtrooms were packed with reporters, family members, and survivors who wanted to see justice served. Rolling himself sat quietly, sometimes humming or scribbling in his notebook. The man who had unleashed unimaginable terror on a city showed no real remorse. Prosecutors detailed the gruesome evidence: the DNA, the staging of the bodies, the recordings from his campsite. The jury had no doubt. Danny Rolling would die by lethal injection. On October 25, 2006, after more than a decade on death row, Danny Rolling was executed at Florida State Prison in Stark. Witnesses described him as calm. He sang gospel hymns in the moments before the lethal injection took effect. His final meal? Lobster tail, shrimp, baked potato, and a strawberry cheesecake. For some families, his death brought closure. For others, it could never be enough. 5 young students were still gone. Their lives, dreams, and futures stolen in the most brutal way imaginable. Gainesville never forgot. The University of Florida built a memorial to honor the victims: Christina Powell, Sonia Larson, Krista Hoyt, Tracy Poles, and Manuel Tabawada. Their names live on as a reminder of the fragility of life and the darkness that can hide in plain sight. The case also changed how law enforcement across the nation handles serial murders. It underscored the importance of DNA evidence, interagency cooperation, and victim advocacy. But beyond the courtrooms and textbooks, the story of Danny Rolling lingers as a chilling truth. Sometimes, the greatest evil isn't a shadowy figure in the distance. It's the neighbor you don't notice, the stranger blending into crowd, the man camping quietly in the woods. Danny Rolling wanted to be remembered. He wanted his name etched into the dark history of America's most notorious killers. But what endures is not his legacy. It's a memory of the 5 young lives stolen, the families forever broken, and a town that will never be the same. In the end, Rolling was just a man consumed by rage. But his crime served as a haunting reminder that the face of evil can sometimes be the one right next door.